Hi everyone, it's Amy here from the blog I Think Therefore I Teach. Welcome to my next video on understanding exam questions. The thought behind this one is that for many of you now, you are going into weeks of mock exams and assessments, and the first thing that you really need to be able to do is interpret and understand what the question is actually asking from you, because how can you answer it properly, how can you structure your answer properly if you do not know what the question is looking for? So let's begin. I've brought them into philosophy, ethics and Christian thought sections. So within the philosophy section, I don't know if you'll be able to read these as clearly, so I'm just going to read them out for two at the same time. Aristotle's view of the soul is most convincing discussed. Now, of course, we've got the soul, so we know from the soul that this is the body, mind and soul first year topic. Most convincing is your critical word, so that's the word you will use throughout your answer. And Aristotle is the focus of this essay, so he is the person that you will talk about in every single paragraph. For me, and this is just my advice, this video is my advice based on years of marking and reading essays, so this is only my advice, but I would expect to see Aristotle at the beginning of every single paragraph. I would expect to see no paragraph on Plato, no paragraph from Descartes, no paragraph from Dawkins. Aristotle is what the exam is asking, the question is asking for. That's who I would like to see in your answer. So Aristotle is your focus and your key. Now you're probably thinking I wouldn't have enough to say about Aristotle's soul. There is enough. But then what you would do within your paragraphs is you would compare Aristotle's ideas to then somebody else, to Plato, to Descartes, but you only ever compare quickly and always in relation to your argument with Aristotle. So if you want to argue that Aristotle's soul is the most convincing, you then raise the problems with Plato's that Aristotle avoids, and that's why Aristotle is the most convincing. Or if you think Aristotle is not convincing because there is no life after death and no soul, or no separate part, just the material, and you want to compare with Dawkins, and you say, well, Dawkins' materialism is better, and Aristotle does not avoid those problems. So Aristotle falls into those problems, therefore is not the most convincing because Dawkins is more convincing. So you have to decide where you're going as far as your line of argument, but Aristotle is always the person you bring it back to. Second question, the teleological argument cannot be defended against the challenge of chance. Now that's very, very wordy as that question, and you'll be potentially think, oh, where do I go with this? What you need to remember is who are the main names in the topic. So for teleological is obviously Aquinas and Paley. So Aquinas and Paley. And then defended by the challenge of chance would be Hume. Hume's your main critic there, Hume or evolution. And so this question is basically saying, which side is better? Who are you? Whose team are you on? Are you team Paley and Aquinas, or are you team Hume and evolution? Once you've made that decision, that's how you're going to argue it. So if you are going to say, if you're going on team Aquinas and Paley, then it can be defended. If you're going team Hume evolution, it cannot be defended. And that's how you do it. Again, my structure is teleological is mentioned first, so therefore they are the structure of your essay. You will start with Aquinas and or Paley. I would never ever combine the two. If you're going to talk about Aquinas, you talk about Aquinas. If you're going to talk about Paley, you talk about Paley. I would never merge them in the same paragraph. And then you would look at evaluating them. Can their argument be defended? What are the strengths and weaknesses? If they can't be defended, then why is Hume or evolution better? And again, I would only ever mention Hume or evolution. I would never use both of them in the same paragraph because you're talking about too many themes there. It becomes too descriptive and not evaluative enough. Paley versus a point from Hume, Aquinas versus a point from evolution, etc., etc. Third, an a posteriori argument is more persuasive than an a priori argument. Discuss this is a really popular one, is this one, because you have to be able to show evidence that you know what an a posteriori argument is and what an a priori argument is. So the a posteriori is obviously teleo and cosmo, the a priori is onto, is ontological. And so with this one, I would pick either teleological or cosmological. I wouldn't do both. And ontological, and then you basically need to pick with your critical word of persuasive which one is more persuasive. Are you team ontological or are you team cosmological, for example? And that's what I would argue. The start of my paragraphs would always be a posteriori. So an a posteriori argument is not more persuasive because I would then explore that, why the weaknesses are. This means that an a priori argument is more persuasive because, and then I would compare, why is that a priori argument better than that a posteriori argument? How has that avoided those problems? Or, of course, vice versa if you want to argue the other way. All right, moving on to the second half. Biggest coffee ever. Aristotle's understanding of reality is more convincing than that of Plato. Now, this is just an Aristotle versus Plato question. Very, very straightforward. Once again, I would have Aristotle structuring your essay. It asks Aristotle first, therefore Aristotle is the key focus, Plato is the afterthought, so it should come second in your paragraph. First in the paragraph, second in the paragraph. Understanding of reality basically is just their argument. It's a fancy way of saying their argument because their arguments talk about reality. Aristotle's reality is here, Plato's reality is another world. Whose argument is more convincing? That's the point of your essay. So convincing is the critical word there, so that's the word that you will use throughout. And once again, you need to decide, are you team Aristotle or are you team Plato? So even if you are team Plato, I would still personally start my answer with about Aristotle. Aristotle's understanding of reality, such as the four causes, is not convincing because this makes Plato's arguments of reality more convincing because he avoids this, he does this, whereas Aristotle does not do this, and I would do it like that. Critically discuss the view that Anselm's ontological argument successfully proves the existence of God. Successfully is your critical word. It's always good to spot your critical word early on because that's the word you need to use in your answer. Obviously, that's who we want, Anselm's ontological arguments. So that pretty much is a straightforward, does Anselm's argument work or not? You don't need to mention Descartes in that answer. I would probably expect to see Gornillo if and or can't. I don't think you have to mention both really to get the top marks because you could just do one side and one the other. That would still work nicely because there's enough in Anselm's argument to really argue whether it is successful or not. Finally, symbolic language is the only way to understand religious language. Symbolic language is obviously goes with analogy and via negativa, so that's where symbols lies within the spec. The only way is your line of argument, but it's not necessarily a critical word, so that's your line of argument there. So you need to say, is it the only way or not? Understand, does it help us understand religious language or not? And so the whole essay is on symbols. That's the key there. Many students in the past have talked about every other subject. They've talked about the whole of religious language and the kitchen sink. No, that's the mistake that you cannot fall into. If it asks for symbol, if it asks for language games, if it asks for verification, if it asks for via negativa, that's what you have to talk about. You have to talk about the topic it asks you in the question. So with this one, symbolic language is the only way to understand religious language. Is it or is it not? So for me, I think symbolic language is better than analogy, put it that way. I think analogy is a dreadful argument. Sorry, Aquinas, but I think analogy is dreadful. So I would say that symbolic language is the only way when looking at analogy, which is far worse. That would be my essay, that would be my answer. I wouldn't bring in anything else because by the time you've done symbol properly, you've evaluated symbol on its own properly, you've compared it with the theory that you've evaluated properly, that is enough in 40 minutes. Right, ethics time. Let's change colours, let's go crazy. Situation ethics provides a useful method of moral decision making. Moral decision making you cannot do properly without linking it to euthanasia. Situation ethics obviously means it links to euthanasia. Euthanasia. Useful is your critical word. Basically, does situation ethics work for euthanasia or not? Your essay is structured with situation ethics only. I would probably not expect to see natural law in there. You do not have to bring natural law in. Most of the time when students bring in natural law, it actually goes against their answer because they waffle on about natural law, they forget what the question is, they don't do it in an evaluative sense and they don't do it quickly enough, and then they run out of time talking about situation ethics, which is what the question actually asks for. So, situation ethics proves a useful method of moral decision making. Does it or does it not? Is it useful when applied to specific things, specific moral decision making within euthanasia? Kantian ethics is too abstract to be applicable to practical moral decision making. Again, moral decision making, you need to know Kant, can't you go business? So that's the first trick, is it's making sure you know which application topic goes where. So Kant is business. So Kant is too abstract. Now, that's a bit of a more unusual critical word. Abstract means that it's a bit bizarre, out there. It's harder to apply to actual reality because it's too abstract. Can't think too abstract to be applicable to practical. So again, we've got the word practical in there as well. So what you would do is you would say another practical moral decision making surrounding business is dealing with sweatshops, the issues surrounding sweatshops. And then you would apply some Kantian approaches to it. So that's how you would do it. So again, the structure would be Kant. I wouldn't expect utilitarianism to be in there. You would link things like duty and say whether it is practical or not when applied to business. And then if it is practical and it does work, then it isn't too abstract. If it doesn't work, it only works in paper, not in practice, then it is too abstract. Assess the claim that all ethical language is meaningless. Really like this question. Students do not like meta-ethics for some reason. I'm sure I've just set this one in my mock for my students as well. Maybe. Assess the claim that all ethical language is meaningless. This is meta-ethics. To assess whether all of the approaches are meaningless or not, I would expect 2 approaches. I don't think you have to do all 3. I think you can still handle this question by just doing 2. You can mention 3 if you want to. So obviously we're talking about ethical naturalism, intuitionism and emotivism here. You could do this answer with 2. I always think if you can do an answer with a fewer topics, use fewer topics. Don't add in more than you need to, because then you're just juggling more things. So assess the claim that all ethical language is meaningless. I would go by ethical naturalism and emotivism for me. I think ethical naturalism has some value. I think emotivism is rhubarb. So that's what I would argue. I would say that it's meaningless if coming from an emotivist perspective, because the Buhara theory, etc., does not work. But then I would say that it isn't all meaningless because coming from an ethical naturalist point of view, a cognitive perspective, it can be seen to work. So that again would be my structure and my line of argument. You could do a paragraph on each. So you could do a paragraph on emotivism, ethical naturalism and intuitionism and say why it is or is not meaningless. That would work nicely. But I always think that some sorts of comparisons, why is intuitionism better or worse than ethical naturalism? Why is emotivism better or worse? I think some sort of comparisons gets that evaluative tone more clearly throughout your answer. Critically assess the view that natural law is the best approach to issues surrounding sex ethics. Now, issues, you need to know what the issues are in sex ethics. The issues are homosexuality, premarital and extramarital sex. You do not talk about anything else. So, homosexuality, premarital sex before marriage, and adultery or extramarital sex, so affairs. So those are the only issues you talk about in your answer. Natural law is the theme of your essay. Natural law is what they're specifically asked for, so therefore natural law is the structure of your essay throughout. And you need to then evaluate whether it is the best approach or not. Now, you could do this by just saying whether it's the best approach or not without any comparison. I think within this one, it's probably better if you did compare. So how you would do it is natural law would be the structure of your essay. That would come first. You would then do your link to the issue. That would come second. And then when you're evaluating it, you could then bring in an argument that's better or worse. And then don't forget as well, because it's sex ethics, you can bring in any theory. So I think I probably personally would say that natural law is the best approach, because whilst you might not like the answers that it produces, it still gives you clear guidelines on what you should and should not do. Just because you don't like what it tells you doesn't mean that you therefore shouldn't apply it. I would then maybe compare it with agape and situation ethics, which I don't think works, and say how just because you're promoting love doesn't actually mean, so for example, you went to Saudi Arabia as a homosexual couple, you held hands and you were arrested. You're showing your love, but you're still arrested because you still broke the law. Therefore, natural law for me would be the best approach to issues surrounding it. So you need to pick your argument. You need to work out, you might argue something completely the opposite. I was just giving you as an example, but you need to be able to pick that approach and then evaluate so clearly whether it is or is not the best approach through those comparisons. Critically assess the view that businesses have a moral duty to put their customers first. Ooh, there's a word in that one that is very, very important. Duty. Are you now getting those little alarm bells that go ding, 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 can't? You should do. This is wanting can't. So, Critically assess the view that businesses have a moral duty to put their customers first. This is a business question, so you can structure it just purely on business. I think that's quite hard, but it's doable. So the structure is business, the structure is the customers, so you would need to think about what your themes are. So you would maybe look at Milton Friedman, you know, about them being open and honest, but it's all about making money. You could look about how the customers' rights that we have, or you could look at whistleblowing or sweatshops where our items are produced. You could look at shareholders, etc., etc. So you could look at all sorts of issues there and say whether the customers should come first and is it their duty. But then you have to apply Kant's ideas of duty. So duty has to be freely chosen. It cannot be for personal gain. And then the difficulties of applying that idea of duty to business. So that's quite a tricky one, but it's a good one. Aquinas' view that conscience is the process of moral decision-making is more convincing than Freud's approach. It's nice and straightforward. Aquinas versus Freud, convincing is your critical word. Who does it better? So my paragraph would be exactly that structure. Aquinas starts, evaluate Aquinas, convincing or not convincing. Freud in the same paragraph, why he's better or worse. That would be the structure of my paragraphs. Final section. Go for a pink. DCT, Doctrines of Christian Thought. The concept of hell does not support an all-loving God. Now, you could get a few synoptic links as to the problem of evil. Concept of hell is death and afterlife, and so you would just work through ideas of hell. Does the concept of hell support an all-loving God or not? The good thing about Christian thought essays is there's not as much structure as with the philosophy and the ethics. You really can just explore these answers, bringing in loads of synoptic links and loads of ideas and loads of discussion points and loads of examples. So really run with these questions. So does the concept of hell, and all its different ways, the physical hell and metaphorical hell, do these actually work with a God that's all loving? Does the idea of purgatory work better? Should everyone go to heaven? Does that make God more all loving, etc., etc.? So really explore and discuss it. To what extent does an exclusivist viewpoint represent the true Christian message? Love questions that say to what extent. Make sure you use those words in your answer. To this extent, to that extent, to a further extent, however, to this extent. You should be using those words in your answer to show to what extent you're arguing something. Exclusivist viewpoint obviously is pluralism and theology. Really like that topic. Represents the true Christian message. Does the exclusivist work or not? It's the strengths and weaknesses of the exclusivist perspective, linking it to pluralism and inclusivism and which one is better. Evaluate the view that Christians should have a mission to those of no faith, is pluralism and society. Evaluate obviously strengths and weaknesses. Should have. That's what's interesting there. Should have a mission to those of no faith. Who says they should have? Where does the should have come from? That's what I would explore in my answer. I would take those words apart. Why have a mission to people of no faith? What is the wrong with someone not having a faith? Who's giving you that mission to do that? And is that a good thing or a bad thing? So that's what I would explore there. You can overlap a little bit of exclusivism into that one as well, and as you can link a little bit the pluralism society into your other one. Critically assess the view that should be that Christianity is inherently sexist. Gender and society, sexism. You would need to, that word inherently is the bit there. Is it inherently? Inherently means the core of it is sexist. Is the core of Christianity sexist? If you argue yes, why? Why is the core of Christianity sexist? Is it Christianity itself, or is it the patriarchy that then informed Christianity, that then made it? So what came first, the sexist patriarchy or sexist Christianity? Is Christianity really that sexist? And think about some of the other arguments that you might have looked at about why it's not, about the things that Jesus did to support women, etc. So be careful with that one. Most students go down the Christianity is inherently sexist. The more arguments I read, the more I actually think that is not the case, and students can't argue that one often very well. Ruther's view that the Christian God should be understood in more female terms is more convincing than Daly's view that God should be abandoned. Wow, what a waffly question. Very, very simply, you've got Ruther versus Daly. Ruther's ideas of female terms, convincing is your critical word, and then this idea that Daly's should be abandoned completely. So it's a Ruther versus Daly. As I've said before, Ruther is therefore the structure because she comes first. Ruther, argument, strengths and weaknesses, compare with Daly. Is Daly better or worse? If Daly is better, therefore it should be abandoned. If Ruther is better, therefore the female terms is the way to go. Keep your themes very small and short for that one, otherwise that is a mammoth, immense question is that one, because even for me it's got 2 PowerPoints, it was that big. So keep your themes very, very short, and if you only mention half of each person, it does not matter. Finally, discuss the view that the strengths of liberation theology outweighs its weaknesses. That is just the strengths and weaknesses of liberation theology. Liberation theology is quite a tough topic, really. So that would just be working through your material and saying whether the strengths, the ideas of orthopraxis over orthodoxy, and the ideas of linking it to Marxism, but the parts it links to Marxism, does the strengths trying to help people in poverty outweigh the weaknesses of collaborating with an atheist ideology? So that's what you would need to discuss there. I think that's it. Yes. Woo. All right, now I know that was quite long. However, hopefully this has helped you be able to understand how to approach different questions, because pretty much all the questions are worded the same. It might just be that it changes the structure, the order of who comes first and second. It might be to what extent does inclusivist viewpoint represent. It just changes the topic areas, but the actual structure itself stays exactly the same. Once you've got the structure, you really are onto a winner. All right, folks, thank you very, very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you would like to keep notifications when I'm uploading all the latest videos, and give me a like if you do find this video useful. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye for now.